Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 22 of TMS. And today we have the pleasure of welcoming onto the show J.D. Scholten, who is running for Congress in Iowa's 4th Congressional District, a district that is currently represented by Republican Steve King. His campaign was just recently endorsed by former presidential candidate Andrew Yang. J.D., welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be here.
We are as well. And you first ran for this seat in 2018 and you lost very narrowly. It was actually, I think, the closest a Democrat has gotten to winning in Iowa for in a long, long time. And of course, you decided to then run again for the seat in 2020. At what point did you decide that this was something that an endeavor that you wanted to take on again?
Yeah, well, I think it's weird because politics is a very zero-sum game. You win or you lose. And we were caught in this kind of no man's land where in a district that no one thought we had a chance, we ended up moving the needle 24 points. We outperformed the top of the ticket by 17. And we got 25,000 more votes than there are even Democrats in the district. And even though we lost by 3, there was so much momentum and everything that it was after giving it a lot of consideration, and I worked on an anti-poverty nonprofit after last cycle. I thought, you know what, we have to do this again. It was so much more than just me. It was all our volunteers. It's all our supporters, and this district really has a desire for change, and we're working on that.
Mm-hmm. So it was almost like a feeling of that you got so close last time and there was still so many people out there who supported you and wanted to see you reach, Congress, that you almost felt like an obligation of sorts from your community to run again.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, there was a lot of Republicans who reached out to me as well and said, hey, we respected what you did last time and we encourage you to stay in the race. And that was encouraging for me too. And I think our message, and I talked with Andrew about, there's so many establishment candidates. There's so much coming out of DC, and we need more grassroots campaigns. We need more, quote, I guess, for lack of a better term, outsiders. But just real people that have real experiences to go into DC and shake it up a little bit. And that's what we were able to do last time. And we continue to do that today.
Yeah. And you mentioned the fact that, and the importance of people are just tired of the insiders, the people who have just been roaming around Washington, D.C. for 30 years. And one thing that I saw from your campaign on your website that made me happy to see, I'm sure makes a lot of people happy to see, is that your campaign's not taking any corporate PAC money.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. That we did it last time, and same with this time. I feel like especially in rural America, this district is the second most agriculture producing district in America. It's very big. It's about 40% of geographic size of Iowa. And so it's what we have seen in rural America. And I think Andrew's message really connected with folks in this district, because rural America has been left for a long time. And we have multinational corporations squeezing our farmers. We have Dollar General coming in and undercutting local grocers. We did a whole tour last fall of going into towns of under 1,000 people, and we called it the Don't Forget About Us tour. And we just started talking, and I mean, the number one thing people talked about was healthcare. And it was pretty similar to last cycle too. Almost everywhere you go in this district, if you go to a gas station, there's a donation box or a pickle jar for folks to help pay for medical expenses. And but that was the number one thing we talked about. But the number two thing is, we talked about local grocers and how it's getting harder and harder to live in rural America, because you have to, a lot of these folks have to travel 30 minutes just to buy fresh produce and fresh meats. And this is again, the second most agriculture producing district in America. We were not feeding ourselves, and farmers aren't making a dime. And you scratch your head and you're like, who are we doing this for? And that's kind of where the no corporate PAC money and things like that kind of where it stems from.
Definitely. And I think that's something that people recognize and they certainly appreciate. And we have a question here from Brian. He wants to know, who is Steve King, because he's pretty infamous. He actually is not going to be your opponent now because he was ousted in the Republican primary, which I have a follow-up question in a second. But first, for those who just don't know, how would you describe Steve King?
Yeah, so he's an 18-year incumbent, and I mean, he has some just notorious quotes on that very racist, xenophobic, a lot of those things. He called Mexicans dirt. He said, "When is or diversity isn't our strength." He talks about the Great Replacement. When I think one of the more recent bigger things was, and which ultimately did him in, was in January 2019, he questioned when white supremacy and white nationalism became a derogatory term. And the Republican establishment stripped him of his committees. And so he wasn't on the Agriculture Committee or Judiciary Committee or the small business committees that he's been on. And so he's really been ineffective. And in 18 years, he's only passed one bill with his sponsorship on it, and it was to rename a post office, and that was before we redistricted. So he's literally hasn't passed a bill that has benefited this district. And he's gone to Austria 5 out of the last 6 years, or maybe it's 5 out of 7 now, I'm not sure, but he's done it on taxpayer time to meet with far right groups, these fringe groups, and I mean, that's him in a nutshell. But I will also say that, like, when HuffPost reports about him, they call him white supremacist Steve King. So
yeah, like it's bad when even the Republicans have to come out on the floor of the House and say how terrible what you said is.
That's exactly right, and not only how terrible, but stripped of all the committees. I don't know. This is just what King says, is that there's been 4 people who've been stripped of their committees. 3 of them have all gone to jail or are felons, and then there's him. He said it as a defensive thing, but it's also kind of
it kind of highlights the quality of his character and the type of politicians that he's kind of mixing himself up with. Right. I want to ask, though, what was your reaction to him losing to Republican Randy Feenstra in the primary, and how does that affect your strategy in terms of the November general election? Because I'm sure all along you knew in the back of your head that there was a possibility Steve King could lose the primary, but I'm sure that, that's who it was in 2018. You knew how to kind of discuss him and connect with voters that maybe would have supported him, but were turned off by all of his racist comments. Yeah. How does that just change the race for you?
Well, the way I view this is that the primary was an extension of what we were able to do in 2018. And if you listen to any of the debates, if you kind of followed along with his opponents, they all said one thing consistently, is that if we were to face King again, we would win. And so that fear was there. And so I think a lot of the votes for Feenstra were more anti-King votes than they were for him votes. And what we're seeing and is a lot of people don't know who Randy is, and especially he's from the very northwest corner of the district, and outside of his probably 5-county radius, a lot of people don't know who he is. And so we have a name recognition advantage. We have an experience advantage in having run this race last time. And we're trying to use all that. And we didn't have a primary, so we were building this entire time. And so we are, as far as how do things change, it doesn't change a thing from what we were going to do. So much of our campaign is about what we're for and not just who we're against. I could have easily ran last time and just bash King the entire time. Well, it wouldn't get anywhere. The way you move people, the way you really have the grassroots organization, it's by telling about what you're for and what you stand for, and not just who you're against. And so our big thing last time was I went to all 39 counties at least 3 times. We have a Winnebago RV, which are made in the district. We bought a used one, threw our logo on the side, and went all 39 counties. We plan to do that again, starting probably about this time next month. And we're trying to find a way to do it in a very safe way. So we're not we're not hurting people or getting people infected or anything like that, but making sure we're all safe. But that is so much of our campaign. That's our MO. It was getting out there to the people. And so we announced that we would hit all, I think there's 378 towns in this district. And we plan to do that between now and November and just talk about what we're for. And it worked the last time. I felt we just ran out of time last time. You got to also remember last cycle, we started from absolute scratch. Everything from contacts to fundraising to everything was just, I mean, it's not, I wouldn't say we wouldn't know what we're doing, but we started from zero. And to get to how far we did, we ended up raising $1 million the last week of the campaign. There was a poll that came out that showed we were within one, and that all hell broke loose after that. And we ended up raising $1 million, but when you have that much money at the very end, you're limited with what you can do. You can maximize on TV, you can go more digital, but that's about it. It's too late for mail. It's too late for adding more field and stuff like that. And so this time, one of the huge part of what we've been able to do is have a lot of those resources a lot earlier, and it's been great.
Yeah, I totally understand that because we saw the same exact thing in Andrew Yang's campaign, us supporters of him, in terms of just, if you're building the plane while it's flying, it's harder than where you go into it a second time around potentially, and you've been there, you've done it before. And I also agreed with you. You're 100% spot on when you talk about a campaign has to be more than just against something. It has to stand for something. That's another thing that a lot of people found very refreshing with Andrew Yang's policies. I want to ask.
Well, I want to, if you don't mind, there's two things I want to say about that. One, I feel that's something that we are, me as a Democrat, and when I say we, Democrat, when we talk about Trump, we can't just be against Trump. We have to be for something. And I feel that's where one thing that I know a lot of people want to beat Trump. I get that, but we have to be for something. Just getting Trump out of office is not enough. We have to push our issues. We have to push our values and what we want.
Yeah.
I apologize. 1 second. And I've been talking all day. And the second thing I wanted to add was on the day of the caucus, I wrote an op-ed talking about my thank you. Sorry, my girlfriend just made me some tea to help with my throat. The day of the caucus, I wrote an op-ed that talked about my kind of view and how I saw things in the caucus, and also just an appreciation of all the candidates. And one of the things that I wanted to mention was that I thought, and I wrote in this, that Andrew won regardless of what happened during the caucus. This was the morning of. I said, doesn't matter who wins tonight, Andrew was the winner. From where he started to where they ended up, it was the biggest shift out of anything. And it was pretty impressive to watch.
Yeah, it definitely was. And that's why I reminded when you were discussing your own journey and your own campaign, it's exactly what it reminded me of. I want to talk about some of your policies in your campaign, but first I just want to take up this question from Cheeto the Burrito. He asks, oh wait, nope, wrong one. It was this one from Cheeto the Burrito. When do you think Iowa schools will open, and what safety measures should there be?
Yeah, it came out the other day or yesterday that they wanted to open them up in this fall and for it with like no mask or anything like that. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I'm a infectious disease doctor or a leader in public health. I'll leave it up to them. But that's part of the problem too, is that I don't think our governor is listening to those leaders. We've really in this state, it's been like we were one of 5 states that didn't shut down, and here in Sioux City, of the 5 states that didn't have a stay-at-home order, 3 of those states are in the Sioux City metro area. Nebraska, South Dakota are just right over the river, and so it wasn't really a shocker that we led the nation for about a couple weeks, in per capita in the outbreak. And so, we got to find a way to, as we come out of this, we got to figure out a way to do it in a safe manner. I mean, we all want to get out of this. I get that. I want to get in the RV and just go, but I know I mean, we still have several counties here that are leading the nation still in outbreaks. I mean, we're agriculture and we have meat packing plants everywhere. And it's just, it's tough. And so, I really don't know what it looks like, to be honest. And we need to, I think I've seen in Sioux City is they're planning for 3 different ways of going to school. They plan for all in class, and they have all virtual, and then they have kind of a hybrid. And so I think that at least school systems won't be blindsided like they were in March, but I'm hoping that they can figure out a way to do it safe.
Yeah, definitely. Safety is definitely the most important. And I want to ask you, what would you say are, like, if you had to pick 3 core messages of your campaign or 3 core tenets of your campaign, what would they be?
Yeah, we talk every day about fix, fight, and secure. So fix healthcare, fight for an economy that works for everyone, and secure our democracy because special interests are dictating it. And I feel a lot of those overlap with what Andrew talks about, and especially the fight for an economy that works for everyone. His human first capitalism, I also can refer to as a progressive capitalism, is something that I feel we need to be out in front of. What we're seeing is, I mean, even before the pandemic, and especially what's happening here in rural America, we need to, first of all, we need to get an on-ramp to get out of the situation that we're on now, but that shouldn't lead to what we were doing. We should on-ramp to where we're going. And I think technology, especially in rural America, like we see the next wave of the economy in Iowa is agriculture technology, but we're so far behind in especially this pandemic has shown we're so far behind in rural broadband and stuff like that we need the infrastructure for technology and to allow us to bloom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you and Andrew specifically have a relationship that goes back several years to when he first started campaigning in Iowa. Can you talk about how that relationship originated and how it developed to the point where you and Andrew were playing basketball together in Iowa in December? And I mentioned that I actually met you there before we started the show, to now to getting to the point where he's actually said, Yang Gang, Andrew Yang, supporters, humanity forward. Everybody support this guy, and let's get someone who I think embodies the humanity first values into office.
Well, so we met originally there's a famous event here in the 4th District in Clear Lake, Iowa, called the Wing Ding, and the year before, or the years leading up to caucuses, it's usually a really, really big deal. And so he was there in 2018. And that's where I first met him. And at the time, I mean, he announced he was running, but not too many people knew about him. And he showed up and we hit it off, but like, it was kind of like who's this guy? and we didn't know much about him. And this would be August of 2018. And so it was right when our campaign was really just becoming big and well known. And so it was just kind of like, we're meeting so many people, and especially at the Wing Ding, it was amazing because the counties that put that on, there's so many people, and it's at the Surf Ballroom, which is legendary. It was the last place where Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, and Ricky Valens played before the horrible plane crash. And so it's a historic place, and it's just a legendary place. So that's where we first met. And then I did my anti-poverty nonprofit, and we ended up doing an event with Andrew in Des Moines, and that would have been in maybe late spring. Oh no, it would have been about Marchish of 2019, and just to see where he went from that first meeting to the Yang Gang starting to get excited and having a semi truck come, and here in Sioux City, my local barista, the coffee shop I go to, he was a huge Yang Gang member, and so to have him, he was constantly telling me all these things, and so it ended up being more and more and more. I just seen the energy, and then Andrew and I started texting each other, and then I saw Andrew. I don't know if it was when he called out Ted Cruz to play
basketball with
him,
him.
or what. But
and
I saw
Ted ducked him.
Yep. So I saw Andrew shooting somewhere, and so I just tweeted it out, and then his staff saw it, and then we just like, oh, we got to get one, we got to get a game, and so finally we were like, well, let's do it in Ames, because when I travel to Ames, it's 3 hours from here, but when I travel there, there's a good group of guys that I hoop with down there, and so I think we had one of Andrew's staffers against 3 of the guys I usually play against. And it was a good competitive game. It was fun.
Yeah, it's on our channel, and over like 100,000 people watched you and Andrew play basketball against each other.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? That moment was when I realized, because that was right before. Was that right before or right after Thanksgiving?
It was a little bit after.
Okay, so thanks. Like, I ended up realizing I was out of shape at that moment, and since that time, I've been really trying to eat healthier and make sure I work out even on the campaign trail.
Yeah, and especially now, where everyone's locked inside, it's kind of it can be hard to try to stay healthy.
Yeah, for folks who may not know, I played minor league baseball, and once the pandemic hit, one Saturday night, I think I went on some just rabbit hole on YouTube, just looking at baseball, like mechanics and stuff. I geeked out big time, and the very
I
next
like baseball,
day,
so I'm into it.
Oh, awesome! So I ended up buying 24 baseballs and a net, and ever since that time, I just go in my backyard, and I've been starting throwing, and now I've gotten my backyard's too small for it, so now I go down to the high school, and so if you're in Sioux City, you can see me randomly throwing at East High School into a net, and so I'm sure a lot of people think I'm weird, but I love it. It's my stress.
No, I get it. I admittedly I haven't played since my high school days too much, but when I was really into baseball, I would do the same thing, just throw a ball into a net. It was fun. I wanna get your thoughts on Andrew's big policy idea. It was, of course, universal basic income.
Yeah,
is universal basic income something that you think we should consider, especially right now where we are losing so many jobs?
Well, I mean, you look at what happened in the pandemic right away, and I mean, we went from, I think as a nation thinking that, that's that thing way out there in the future, like that doesn't make sense for what's happening right now. All of a sudden to like everyone, even Republicans saw the need for it during this pandemic. Yeah. And so I think what we're seeing with, millions and millions of Americans losing their job, I think what we're seeing in this economy, and one of the things I think that I love about Andrew and his message was talking about the future, and I think so many things in politics, it's putting band-aids on things, and
100%.
And I think one area where I think the moment where I was like, Andrew is definitely onto something, was I had to drive to Des Moines, and I was drinking too much water and I had to pull off and use the facilities, and this was a very rundown truck stop. And I go in there, and in the bathroom, there's a Yang Gang sticker on there. And I think it was that moment where I'm like, man, that's the type of politician I like. The ones that like in this rundown place, there's a trucker who came in here who felt like this message needs to be passed on. And I loved it. And so I do think that an on-ramp to get out of this, we should consider thinking more and more about UBI. And on ways to go. I mean, you look at like the number one job in Iowa is truck driving, and where's that going to be in 20 years? And you look at a lot of things. Even right before the pandemic, I think last fall and over the winter, we have what I consider the new strip mall right over here. I mean, it wasn't there when I was in high school 20 years ago, and two of the big stores there closed. And you look at the economy, it's shifting, it's changing. And you look at the needs of what a worker needs right now, and with the gig economy, with so many different layers to where we're going and shifting. It's not the traditional way that it was, or not even the traditional way. It wasn't the way it was 40 years ago or when my parents' generation. And so we need to adapt to the times. And I think it's not only with how we view, like I mentioned, the progressive or human first, humanity first capitalism or economy.
He called it human-centered capitalism.
Human-centered. Yeah, that's right. And I think that's brilliant. That's exactly right. And I mean, you're looking at what happened during the pandemic right here in Sioux City. You saw meatpacking plants and forcing these people to work for $16 an hour. And in 1984, when my family, I was 4 years old when we moved here to Sioux City, these meatpacking plants, the union job then at the time was $16 an hour. So 4 decades later, same price. And they're in the meanwhile, it's not giving consumer cheaper food, and they're still squeezing farmers. And so all this is about profit for these multinational corporations. And it is, we got to change that. We got to have human-centered capitalism, 100%.
You reference the fact that, you know, wages there with the $16 an hour, it hasn't changed in 40 years. And you mentioned farmers, and you've actually said before about farmers that, quote, farmers haven't made a profit in 5 years. And your district happens to be one of the most rural in the nation. Do you think that universal basic income specifically could also be part of the solution for the small rural farmers who are struggling so much to the point where many of them have reached like a point where it's really sad to see like the amount of mental health issues and drug overdoses and suicides that happen to people when they hit that rock bottom point where they lose their job or their farm isn't, you know, making the same amount of capital it did for them 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah. And so that quote was probably a couple years ago, because we're at 7 years at this point, and this year is going to be 8 years of low commodity prices. And one of my biggest things that I'm pushing for is enforcing our antitrust laws, because right now, not only are these multinational monopolies and corporations are dictating prices, they're squeezing farmers, they're suppressing the workers, and they're making consumers pay for it. But we got to decentralize. Our food system's so concentrated. If a meat packing plant in Sioux Falls goes down, it affects the whole U.S. market. And if we're going to be a secure nation, we need to be a food secure nation. And so, but getting back to the UBI, you know that that's a huge part of it. You know, farmers, they don't have employer health insurance. Getting them health insurance, farm debt is at an all-time high. And so there's a lot of little things that are adding up. And so that is, I think, something that isn't being talked about enough, about UBI to help farmers. But I think there's so much involved in it. I don't think that's the only solution. We also need to enforce our antitrust laws. We got to get these markets for it. I mean, I think it's more like it's so sad to see. Like, I have a family friend who is lives on a Century farm, and when the dad retired, he told his son, he's like, I'm renting it out. I'm not letting you farm. There's no profitability in this anymore. And we did this event, this town hall down in a small town south of here in the fall, and a woman like heard my message on agriculture and enforcing our antitrust laws and all this, and she was just in tears. And she goes, my son just graduated from Iowa State University, and I don't have the guts to tell them there's no future for you in farming. And it's sad.
Yeah, it definitely is. And like me personally, I remember when I was following Andrew's campaign in Iowa, they had this event, oddly enough, at like a Trump bar in a rural Iowa town. So of course, there's a few farmers maybe had too much to drink, kind of like heckling Andrew. And me, I'm just trying to get like a good shot of Andrew's audio so the people can hear. So I decided to go over to talk to the guy, see if I can settle him down. But I end up talking to him for 45 minutes, and he's this Trump voter, Republican, lives in rural Iowa. He's been a farmer his whole life. His parents were farmers, and he just tells me this story that paints a really just kind of dystopian picture that makes you really sad. And I think traditionally Republicans farmers tend to be Republicans, but I think that people are starting to see, that the Trump administration specifically hasn't lived up to their promise to help the farmers.
Right. I mean, you look at, you have an option here to grow grain, and it's either corn or soybeans. And when the corn market right now, what this administration has done to the renewable fuel standard has just decimated the industry, and they picked. I mean, you have a choice of continuing with what the law Congress has passed, the standard, and where it's going with the amount of ethanol blend. And one of the, I know a lot of folks may not be huge on ethanol, but I met with the California Air Resource Board, and they said if we plan to get carbon neutral or decarbonize as a nation, having renewable fuels in the fuel system has to be part of that equation. And so that's why I'm pushing for that with climate change. But this administration has picked up big oil over our Iowa farmers, big time. And so then you go to the beans side of it. Well, we started this trade war, and we don't have a market for beans like we did. And about 3 weeks ago, China bought a huge shipment of beans from Brazil, even though the American bean was cheaper. And that's just a slap in the face to our farmers. And then you look at hogs and cattle, the amount of concentration, like I mentioned before, we had this battle 100 years ago when the Big Five packers ended up, they broke up the Big Five in 1920. And as a result, in 1921 was the Packers and Stockyards Act. And Mother Jones wrote an article about us saying that this is the only campaign in America talking about the Packers and Stockyards Act. But next year will be the 100-year anniversary of it, and I hope that's my first year in Congress, and I want to renew a modern version of that. And so when I was born in 1980, there was 4 Packers. The main 4 controlled 35% of the market share. And now the Big 4 controlled 85% of the market share. And 2 of those companies are in Brazil. And so again, getting back to if we're going to be a secure nation, we need to be a food secure nation. That's a huge part of it.
Another concern that I think many people watching share, and probably a lot of people in Iowa share, is the effect that automation could have on Iowa's economy. And I think there was one study that said that 40% of the jobs that we've lost during this pandemic may not come back. They may ultimately be replaced by robots because robots can't get sick. You don't have to pay robots, sick leave, or, it's easier. They save money, and companies at the end of the day care about their bottom line. How much do you worry about automation there in Iowa, and what kind of solutions do you think should be on the table?
Yeah, well, you look at this, I view this from the standpoint of the American worker, and in a lot of factories that we've had here. And to be honest, our politicians out in DC have sold out the American worker for a long time. And I think the number one issue as far as the economy goes before this pandemic was that America has not addressed the fact, like globalization as it affects the working class. And that's why I was so naturally drawn to Andrew's message, is because he was one of the few people who were talking about this and where are we going to go and how do we get there. I with automation and everything, it is, there's a lot of, I don't think we're talking about this enough in the fourth industrial revolution and what that looks like. We don't nearly talk about this enough. And that's one of the biggest things that I think we need to do is talk about, okay, what's that on-ramp to getting out of this pandemic and this economic crisis? Okay, and then from there, where do we want to go? Because the way I view this, if we're going to take on a nation like China, who has, 2 billion people or how many billion people, and we're a nation of 330 million, it cannot just be Silicon Valley versus China. It cannot just be the urban areas versus China. Districts like the fourth district are going to be what I want this district to be is the epicenter of 21st century resilient agriculture. And that means that not only are we feeding the world, we're also feeding ourselves, which we're not doing right now. 90% of food consumed in Iowa is imported. And the stat that I think I talk about a lot is 60% of our apple juice comes from China. Think about the economics of that. Think about the climate, the environmental impact, the climate impact on shipping all that here. Where, I mean, we're not known as we're known for agriculture, but in like corn and soybeans, but we're not really known for apple. But there's plenty of apple orchards here in the fourth district, and there's apple orchards all throughout this country. And so, why are we bringing in 60% of the apple juice we're consuming? Why are we bringing it in from China? It makes no sense, and it's all policy driven. And so I think finding solutions to those are the same as finding solutions to automation.
Yeah, there's so many different, all of the problems I feel in politics, they're very nuanced and people try to simplify them, but really it's, there's 5 different contributing elements at play to every single issue. I want to ask you this question. It kind of put you on the spot a little bit, but I like a lot of what you're saying. Would you say that you're in the Yang gang?
That's a good question. I am in a sense that I'm, this is the hardest question I have. I think I am. I wouldn't say that, like, if the Yang gang is where am I here? If the Yang gang is this, I'm somewhere in there. Like what are those over the Venn diagrams? I'll say that I am in the Yang gang on a lot of different points. And yeah. I think just Andrew and I is like, we may not, like when we were talking about the endorsement and everything, is like we overlap on so many things. We say it from a different angle a lot of times, but we at the end of the day, it's so overlapping. And yeah. And I was talking with you have to do call time and ask strangers and call up strangers, ask them for money. And one of the notes was this person is a Yang gang member. And I started talking to him, and he was not a Democrat. And it was interesting. He was a Republican who just really liked Andrew Yang. And I was just like, that's what we need more of, And and out of every campaign, I saw just so many people bought into who Andrew was. And so I would love to be honored to be called a Yang gang member. I'll say that.
Awesome. That makes that makes people happy to hear. That's the beautiful thing about what a political movement should be at its core is, I don't think that, me personally, I disagree with Andrew on some people would say you seem like his biggest fan, but I disagree with him on a number of areas. But, I think if you try to like purity test a movement or purity test people's beliefs, you aren't going to get anywhere. In terms of recent news, over the last month, there have been worldwide protests against police brutality following the murder of George Floyd. And I saw that on your own YouTube channel. It's something that you've been following and making a point to talk about the effect of racism in our country and on policing. What policies, though, would you suggest in terms of reforming our police departments?
Yeah, and before I say the policies, I just want to say, like, in this district, it's what has been amazing to me is seeing that we've had a congressman for 18 years who he had the Confederate flag on his desk, yet Iowa was part of the Union. And I think per person, Iowa lost more people within the Union than any other state. And so it's been just amazing to see in this district. We've had, I think, 16 different communities have events, Black Lives Matters events, and just it's been one of those things that just there is a movement out there. And one of the things that I love to promote is we had a judge who just retired, and now he's teaching at Drake by the name of Mark Bennett. He has led the nation in pushing to end mandatory minimums. I think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough, and I'm just so proud that he was in this district fighting for that for decades now. And because that means if you get caught with a certain drug, you have to serve at least this amount of time, even if you've never done anything wrong in your life. And if you just happen to be one time, wrong place, wrong time, it just that ruins people's lives. And so you see that in a lot of different areas, but that's one area we need to fix. I mean, we need to reform the police when they are the ones who are dealing so much with addiction and mental illness. They need help. I feel they need help as much as the people who need help as well. And so you look at we did some research after the horrific death of George Floyd, and in this district we have a city and a county, both of them in the same place, that they both entities of police. So the sheriff and the city police have grenade launchers. Like,
wow.
Think about that. Think of when a police and a sheriff. So there's two different grenade launchers in this small little town or small little area. When would they need that? You know? And think of the money that went behind that. Think of what you could do with mental health services, adding more social workers, adding more addiction social worker and addiction and crisis help along the way. Like that's the mind frame where we should go with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
And so that, yeah.
I was just gonna say, and it has effects, in terms of like the effect then of how police interacts with their communities, because it's Andrew said this on his podcast recently, is if you arm the police like at war, they're at war, suddenly when you're at war, you need an enemy, and that becomes the people. So it's grenade launchers. I've never heard of I've heard a lot of things about police. Grenade launchers is a new one for me.
Right. And
what could they possibly need to blow up?
And in the 4th Congressional District of Iowa, like they must have to blow up a cornfield. But you also get to the point of, we have we're graduating high school students who have never seen Time of Peace. And I don't think this gets talked about enough, is that we are still putting $48 billion into Afghanistan every year. And for that same amount of money, we could have high quality internet all throughout the whole district, or not the district, the nation. $48 billion going to Afghanistan every year. And that militarism leads to our police getting some of these equipment as well. And so I don't think that gets talked about nearly enough as well.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Just my time in Iowa, I've definitely seen how you don't have internet in certain areas, and you think of how important internet is. Like, it really is. It connects you to the entire world. I think it's something that if we truly want to put our entire country's economy into the 21st century, you're 100% spot on. I really like that, comparing it to the amount of money that's spent in Afghanistan, how you can actually put the entire country to have a good internet It seems like seems very that's the direction our country should move in. This next question comes from Matt Wetstein. He is a professor at Iowa State University and lives in Ames, Iowa. And he is also one of the founders of the Humanity First Movement Iowa chapter. He writes, Mr. Scholten, the Iowa legislature snuck in last-minute changes to make voting in Iowa harder. This is part of the larger battle we've seen over voter disenfranchisement and over our problematic voting system. What policies do you support at the federal level when it comes to protecting the fairness of our elections? What should Iowa do at the state level? And lastly, do you support ranked choice voting?
Yeah, I do. Well, ranked choice for a general election, or
I think
I would love to see the Iowa caucus go ranked choice. I think that's our solution to keeping the caucus here in Iowa, and I will defend that. The Iowa caucus. I know we had the app and everything this year, but I would love to see the caucus go ranked choice. As far as when I lived in Seattle, I voted, and you would get in the mail. You would get you could vote. It's vote by mail there, and you would get a whole packet. And you get to look up every person and what they believe and their statement and all this stuff. And so to me, that's like, you go to the polls now and you really, you may not know some of the down ballot races. You may not know you may not know whose political career you're accidentally voting for, and things like that. And so I loved the vote by mail. I thought we did that for the primary here, super successful. And that's the idiotic thing about this is in Iowa, the primaries were the record turnouts, and now they're saying, oh, it's dangerous. Even my opponent Feenstra, he won because of vote by mail, and then he immediately voted to not do vote by mail in the general.
Yeah.
But I mean, ending gerrymandering, ending voter roll purges, ending the voter ID laws that just makes it hard for a lot of Iowa State students to vote. We just got to make it easier for people to vote. I know a lot of places in the country, it's easier to buy a gun than it is to vote. And so, yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to money in politics also, what type of solutions do you think we should have there?
I really liked what Andrew talked about. Was it democracy dollars?
Yes.
The biggest thing so as a middle class person trying to run for office, it is ridiculously hard. And you see why wealthy white men tend to be candidates and in office, is because the system's meant for that. And it was really hard for us when we first launched. We launched very humbly. I don't come from money. I don't know a ton of wealthy people. And so when we launched our campaign originally, fundraising was extremely, extremely hard. And then we just success breeds success, and we started getting connections and all this stuff. Which reminds me, if anybody wants to contribute to the campaign, you can go to scholtenforiowa.com. Sorry, self plug. We absolutely need to get corporate interest out. I mean, it is disgusting. The fact that, you look at common sense laws like universal background checks for guns. 97% of Americans agree on that. But the fact that we can't get that passed shows a failure in our democracy. When 97% of the people want something and it's not law, that's just a failure of our democracy. And you see healthcare, people need healthcare. It's nuts where we're at, and it's all special interest. And everything you look at, and it's just special interest is there to challenge you. And I think there couldn't be anything more that we need. I get asked all the time, if you could do one thing, what could you do? And as much as healthcare is one of the biggest needs of our nation, as much as climate change, none of that gets. We don't improve any of that if we don't get money out of politics and clean up the special interests.
When it comes to the idea of having congressional term limits, what are your thoughts there?
So here's the thing. I'm 100% for them. I don't want to be a career politician. But one of the things that I think we also need to be worried about, that if we don't get campaign finance reform done first, that there will be a whole lobbyist sector that just dictates everything. And so we'll pump in new people, but the lobbyists will always be there. So that's what I want to make sure we don't go towards. But
yeah,
I'd be, I mean, if you can't get in Congress, in the U.S. House, which I'm running for, if you can't get stuff done in 5 to 12 years, or I'm sorry, 5 to 6 terms, so 10 to 12 years, you should get out.
We've really appreciated your time today and coming on and answering our questions. I want to ask one final one here, and you mentioned it before that you used to be a minor league baseball player. I think then you, if I'm remembering correctly, you played in Canada.
Oh yeah, yep.
Yeah.
I played in 7 different countries.
Wow, that's incredible. And then you're a basketball guy as well. So I can tell you clearly have a passion for sports. If you were still playing right now, like, what would your expectations be in terms of keeping players and fans safe as the major sports leagues do begin to reopen? Like, baseball just announced a 60-day season. The NBA, they're supposed to do something in Disney. What would your thoughts be on that? Like, from a player's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking. I still have a couple of buddies who play in the bigs, and I've talked with them about this. And I mean, I haven't talked to them since the Major League Baseball announcement, so I don't know their fresh take. But I would say that, like, I mean, they're worried about their families. You know, at the end of the day, like, they love playing, they love being out there, but at the same time, like, what does that mean to their families? I mean, they're on the road already a lot, but, like, does that mean they have to quarantine them when they get back? Like, there's so much unknown. And you see, like, New York right now, if you travel to New York, there's a 14-day quarantine that you're supposed to have. Well, teams are going to be coming in and out of there. And so it's none of this is ideal. I don't know. I don't know how they do this. And I don't know how I would feel. I mean, it's tough. Given the scenario of if I had a chance to play Major League Baseball or a chance to like not during this time, I mean, it's such a tough question that I feel bad for a lot of these players and like, especially the minor leaguers. That's what I feel like. Major League Baseball was already going to put a lot of these minor league teams on the chopping block. And now coming out of this, I think this pandemic and them not playing the minor leaguers not playing this year, I think that is going to be just detrimental to the game and these indie leagues and things like that. Just baseball is, I'm a sucker for it. I'm horribly biased and I love it, but like, it's such a huge part of who we are. And what I love about baseball is that it brings so many different people out. I had a buddy who just liked being outdoors. He was an architect. He knew a little bit about the game. I think he played Little League, but he just liked being outdoors and drinking beer. And I have a former professor who actually actively wrote essays about how there shouldn't be college athletics. And I wore a Dizzy Dean shirt, and he said oh, Dizzy Dean, he goes, the last 30-game winner in the National League. And I was just like, whoa, I thought you hated sports, but it turns out, no, he loves it. He just had this philosophy that colleges shouldn't have athletics.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No. And then it brings in, like, all the stats and everything. Baseball brings people together. So
yeah, it does. Well, I was going to ask, who do you support even up there in northwestern Iowa?
So the closest team is Kansas City. I would say a lot of people are Cubs fans. We got the Iowa Cubs here, but then WGN, every day after school, we listened to Harry Carey growing up. But I'm a Twins fan. I got the Homer hanky right there.
I see that.
I grew up Kirby Puckett and Kent Herbeck and all those guys, and so Jack Morris, and so that's who I cheer for.
Yeah, so I said that was going to be the last question, but I lied because one more just came in
Okay.
from chat. Cheeto the Burrito, he wants to know, are you a proponent of breakfast pizza like Rob Sand? And I actually, before I didn't know who Rob Sand was, so I wanted to make sure real quick. I wasn't just bring up some random guy, but then I get it and I go on his Twitter, and this is his tweet this morning.
Yeah.
I've had the Casey's breakfast pizza. I love Casey's, by the way. It's amazing.
So Casey's Pizza, I mean, Sioux City has amazing pizza, and we have a very unique pizza too. So I'm really biased, but like when it comes to I love Casey's. Their breakfast pizza is amazing. I would say like Rob, I think takes it a little too far on how much he likes it, but no, it's great. And if you come through Iowa, it's weird because like when you get people from out of state come in here for whatever reason, you're like, oh, this gas station has really good pizza, and they look at you like,
yeah, I know, that's the reaction I got.
Yeah, I'm like, hey, try it, and if you try it, and I don't think I've met too many people who tried it, and I couldn't even think of one off the top of my head who said, oh, this isn't great. So
it's good stuff. Yeah. I highly recommend it. Anyways, JD, I appreciate you coming on again and answering our questions today. I know you mentioned it earlier, but guys, if you would like to learn more about JD's policies, his background, even volunteer or donate to the campaign, is it Scholten for Iowa?
Yep. So SCHOLTEN, and then numeric 4 for the 4th Congressional District, and then IOWA.com.
Yeah, and I believe the link's in the description as well if you'd like to click it out on there. So either way, thank you very much, and take care, everybody who's watching. Hope you guys have a good weekend.